All right, let's dive into the world of René Girard and his book, Deceit, Desire, and the Novel. We're taking a deep dive into this idea of mimetic desire. Ever get the feeling that you want something just because someone else does?
It's pretty amazing how Girard kind of pulls back the curtain on this, you know? He, like this hidden force that's shaping so much of what we want.
Yeah, and his argument is that we don't just come up with these desires on our own.
Exactly. He says it's all about seeing somebody else wanting something. He calls it triangular desire. There's you, the thing you want, and then the person who's already desiring it, the mediator.
So it's not just, I want that thing. It's, I want to be like that person who wants that thing.
Right. Or even I want to beat them to it. It becomes this kind of competition.
Oh, I see.
And Girard uses all these fascinating examples from literature.
Like what?
Well, like Don Quixote, he's obsessed with this fictional knight, Amadis of Gaul.
He wants to be a knight errant.
He doesn't just want to be a knight, he wants to be Amadis.
Ah, okay. So he's modeling himself after this ideal.
Exactly. And that's the thing with mimetic desire. It's not always about the object itself, it's about what possessing it means.
Okay, that makes sense.
Another great example is Monsieur de Rênal in The Red and the Black.
Oh, yeah. He's the guy who gets totally fixated on hiring Julian Sorel as a tutor.
Right. But the thing is, he only gets really obsessed with it when he starts to think that his rival, Valinod, wants to hire Julian first.
So it's not even really about Julian's teaching skills at that point. It's more about...
It's totally about one-upping the rival, and that's how this triangular desire works. It makes the object seem even more desirable because now it's tied up in this whole rivalry thing.
Oh, wow.
It's like that trendy item that suddenly everyone's got to have.
Oh, yeah. Like when you see everyone on social media wearing those shoes or whatever, you're like, wait a minute, I need those too.
Exactly. Or that job promotion everyone's vying for. Suddenly, it's not just about the job itself, it's about proving yourself superior to all those other people who want it.
So the chase becomes the main attraction, you could say.
That's what Girard calls the metamorphosis of desire. The actual thing you're after starts to matter less than what possessing it represents. Status, belonging, victory.
I'm starting to see how this plays out in so many different areas of life.
It really is everywhere once you start looking for it. Now, Girard also makes this really interesting distinction between external and internal mediation.
Okay, what's that all about?
So think of external mediation like Don Quixote and his hero Amadis. The mediator is kind of distant, almost legendary. They're not really in your day-to-day world.
Okay, so internal mediation is when things get a little closer to home.
Exactly. It's when the mediator is someone you actually know, someone you're interacting with, like Monsieur de Rênal and his rival, Valinod. They're constantly comparing themselves, trying to outdo each other, and that makes the desire so much more intense, even painful sometimes.
Oh, yeah, I get that. It's like when you realize your friend wants the same thing you do.
Yeah.
Suddenly, it's not just about getting the thing anymore. It's about who gets it first.
Exactly. And Girard suggests that this whole shift from external to internal mediation actually reflects a change in society itself. We've moved away from those fixed hierarchies like kings and knights and all that, and now it's more like...
Like anybody can be your rival.
Precisely. And that creates this kind of constant low-level anxiety, right? Because we're always measuring ourselves against everyone around us.
Which makes a lot of sense when you think about how competitive our society feels these days.
Right. It's like we're always trying to win at something, even if we don't realize it.
So if we're always trying to win this game, is anyone actually achieving genuine satisfaction?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it leads us to one of Girard's most fascinating and maybe even a little bit disturbing ideas.
Isn't it?
What if, even when we win, we often end up empty-handed? Like, we get the object, but it doesn't really fulfill us the way we thought it would.
Oh, so like you're saying we get to the top of the mountain and realize the view wasn't all that great?
Exactly. Or the view was great, but now you're looking for a higher mountain. It's a never-ending cycle.
So what's the point then?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. Girard says that to really win the game, you have to. Well, you have to kind of play a different game.
What do you mean?
He says to truly win the object of desire, you have to conceal your desire for it.
Wait, so you're saying playing it cool is the ultimate power move?
You could say that. It's about strategy, about making the object or even the mediator desire you instead.
Like playing hard to get.
Exactly. Like Julian Sorel, that ambitious young guy in The Red and the Black. He wins over Mathilde de la Mole, who's, this high society woman, by acting like he's not that interested in her.
Isn't there something kind of appealing about that, though? Like this idea that you're self-sufficient, you don't need anything from anyone?
Oh, absolutely. But then it becomes a question of, is that real self-sufficiency, or is it just another way of playing the game? It's all very complex, and it gets even more complicated when we start to look at the darker side of mimetic desire.
Oh, darker side.
Yeah, Girard gets into some pretty intense territory, like masochism and sadism.
Oh, wow. Okay, this is getting interesting.
We'll dive into all that next time. Buckle up. So we were talking about that darker side of mimetic desire last time. You know, how it can get kind of, well, a little twisted.
Yeah, you mentioned masochism. How does that fit into all this wanting what someone else has? It seems kind of like the opposite.
Well, think about it this way. The more someone rejects us, or the more something seems out of reach, the more we tend to,
The more you want it.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like it's that forbidden fruit kind of thing. The obstacle itself almost becomes the fuel for the desire.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Girard gives this example from Proust. The narrator in Remembrance of Things Past is constantly drawn to people who reject him.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's like he needs that validation, even if it means experiencing pain.
That's heavy. So are we talking self-sabotage here? Like, are we subconsciously seeking out rejection?
Well, it's not always conscious. It's more like Girard suggests it's connected to this deep human need for something more, something transcendent.
Transcendent.
Yeah, like we're looking for something outside of ourselves to give us meaning, you know? So even being rejected by someone we've kind of put on a pedestal.
Like a celebrity or someone we really admire.
Yeah, it's almost like it reinforces their divine status in our eyes.
Oh, wow. That's a...
It's kind of a messed up logic, but it's definitely a thing. And it's not just masochism either. Girard also talks about the flip side, sadism.
Hold on. Sadism.
Yeah, he argues that we can actually find a strange satisfaction in denying other people what they desire, especially if we see them as rival.
Okay, now that's getting a little creepy. So we're not just imitating desires. We're also taking pleasure in manipulating them.
Well, it's not always that conscious or malicious. It's more about these subtle power dynamics that are always at play with mimetic desire. You know, the person who seems less invested, less needy, they often end up having the upper hand.
This is all starting to feel a bit hopeless. Are we just stuck in this endless cycle of manipulating and being manipulated?
Well, Girard does paint a pretty stark picture of human nature, but he also offers some potential solutions. He looks at Christianity, for example.
Religion. How does that fit into all this?
It's not so much about converting to a particular religion. It's more about how Christianity can help us understand and even potentially escape these mimetic traps.
Okay, I'm curious. How so?
Well, Girard points to the crucifixion of Christ as this powerful example of how even our hatred and violence can actually be directed towards those we secretly admire or even want to emulate.
Whoa. You're saying, like, we might attack someone because deep down we see them as a rival for something we want, even if we don't realize it.
Exactly. It's a challenging idea, but it kind of makes you think about all these conflicts we see in the world, right? Both personally and on a bigger scale.
Yeah, it does. Like, you see that all the time in politics, or even with, like, fandoms and stuff.
Yeah.
People get so hostile towards anyone they see as a, as a threat.
Right. And what Girard suggests is that Christianity offers this way to break out of that cycle by encouraging self-awareness and what he calls renunciation.
Renunciation. So, like, giving up on what you want.
Well, not exactly. It's more about recognizing that true fulfillment doesn't come from possessing objects or getting external validation. It's about something deeper, something more authentic.
That sounds great in theory, but it's also, easier said than done. We live in a world that's constantly telling us what we should want, who we should be.
It's definitely a challenge. But by understanding how this whole mimetic desire thing works, we can start to see through all those messages, We can make more conscious choices.
So awareness is the first step, like recognizing when we're getting caught up in that game of comparison.
Exactly. Once you see the game for what it is, you can start to play it differently, or maybe even, choose not to play at all.
That's easier said than done, though, right? Like, how do we actually break free from these patterns that are so deeply ingrained?
It's definitely not easy, but it is possible. One thing Girard talks about is cultivating a sense of detachment.
Detachment.
Yeah, like learning to step back from those mimetic desires to really ask yourself, do I actually want this? Or am I just chasing after it because someone else has it?
It's almost like we need to become more skeptical of our own desires.
Right. Like, don't just take them at face value. And that's where things like mindfulness and self-reflection come in. You know, taking the time to pause, to really listen to your inner voice.
Well, we can tell the difference between the desires that are really ours and the ones we've kind of...
Borrowed from others, exactly.
This is all starting to sound like therapy.
Well, it is a form of self-therapy, isn't it? It's about understanding yourself better, your motivations, your values, and you don't have to do it alone.
Oh, you mean like finding a therapist?
Well, sure, if that's helpful. But I also mean, surrounding yourself with people who value authenticity, people who aren't so caught up in that whole mimetic game.
Yeah, like finding your tribe, people who encourage you to be yourself.
Exactly. And for anyone who's feeling overwhelmed by all this, just remember, start small. Just try to be more aware of those moments when those mimetic desires are kicking in.
And be patient with yourself. It takes time to unravel these things.
Exactly. It's a journey. Be kind to yourself and celebrate the small victories along the way.
This has been incredibly insightful. So much to think about. But before we get too lost in the weeds here, let's shift gears a bit. What does a life actually look like when it's less driven by these external forces? So we've been talking about this idea of mimetic desire and how it can kind of lead us down these, not so great paths.
Right, all those borrowed desires and rivalry.
Yeah, exactly. But we left off on this idea of what does a life actually look like when it's not so driven by those external forces?
Well, it's not about completely erasing desire. Right? I mean, we're human. It's more about shifting our focus, I guess.
So instead of chasing after all that stuff that we think we're supposed to want,
Exactly. Instead of always looking outside of ourselves for validation and meaning.
we start looking inward.
Yeah. Think about Girard's metamorphosis of desire. We get so fixated on the object itself that we lose sight of what it represents.
Like we're so busy trying to keep up with the Joneses that we don't even stop to ask, do I even like the Joneses?
Exactly. And it's not just about material things either. It could be achievements, relationships, even our own identities.
So how do we even begin to untangle ourselves from all of that?
One key is to become more aware of how we're consuming desire. Like when you feel that craving for something, that I gotta have it feeling,
Yeah.
stop and ask yourself, where is this coming from? Is this something I truly value? Or am I just, reacting to what someone else has?
It's like we need to become more skeptical of our own desires.
Yes. Don't just blindly follow them. And that's where things like mindfulness and self-reflection can be super helpful.
So taking the time to really check in with yourself.
Exactly. Tune into that inner voice. What is it telling you?
This is starting to sound a lot like therapy.
Well, it is a form of self-therapy, right? It's about getting to know yourself better, figuring out what truly matters to you. And it doesn't have to be a solitary thing either.
Oh, you mean like finding a therapist?
Sure, that can be helpful. But I also mean, finding your people, surrounding yourself with people who value authenticity, who aren't constantly caught up in that whole mimetic game.
Yeah, finding your tribe, the people who support you in being your true self. So for anyone listening who's feeling a little overwhelmed by all of this,
Start small. Just try to notice those moments when that mimetic desire kicks in.
and be patient with yourself. It takes time to change those deeply ingrained patterns.
Exactly. It's a journey, not a destination. Be kind to yourself and celebrate those small victories.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into René Girard and his ideas. So much to think about.
It really is. And I think the most important thing is to keep the conversation going, Read Girard's work, talk to friends about it, reflect on your own experiences.
So to everyone listening, we challenge you to take a moment to think about your own desires, what feels truly yours, and what might you have unknowingly borrowed from others.
It's a question worth asking. You might be surprised by what you discover.
And until next time, keep diving deep.